Aleister Crowley, 666. Welcome. I've held off recording a vlog on Aleister Crowley as I'm somewhat critical of him. I did write a hatchet job, but I think that's putting it too strongly. I'm trying to be fair. But so many magicians are completely enamoured with Crowley, so it's very difficult for me to write. Indeed, Tobias Churton, who I've got a lot of time for, and he's one of Crowley's biographers, would suggest that I'm simply repeating the same mistakes about Crowley which were started during his lifetime and have never subsided. A good many people who love Crowley are ceremonial magicians who practice Crowley's magic, which is known as Thelema. Although, in fairness, it's more of a framework than actually Crowley's magic, which I will discuss later. Whereas I'm not a magician and largely shun ceremony, and certainly have never attempted to repeat any of Crowley's magic, so who am I to speak? What I know about magic is through being a victim of black magic, and little, if any, of this is from the Western tradition. So I'd be the first to accept that I'm not the best person to criticise Crowley. I do consider myself a mystic, and the Golden Dawn, who Crowley was a member of, merges magic with mysticism. So I'm all, by the same token, I'm not entirely unqualified to assess Crowley. But most people who vlog on magic know considerably more than I on Crowley. In fairness, Crowley did believe that magic was psychological and about the will. And I have to admit, this is something I'm very close to agreeing with. Indeed, I've argued in the past that ceremonial magic simply assists those who are using the evil eye. Aleister Crowley. So much that Crowley told us about himself has been proven to be untrue. Therefore, I don't intend to repeat an extensive biography of him, as there's so little of it I trust. I mean, I could spend a lot of time trying to verify things, but, you can go elsewhere for that. Aleister Crowley was born Edward Alexander Crowley on the 12th of October 1875 and died on the 1st of December 1947. He was an English occultist, ceremonial magician, poet, painter, novelist and mountaineer. He founded the religion of Thelema, identifying himself as the prophet entrusted with guiding humanity into the Æon of Horus in the early 21st century. He was a prolific writer, if not always that readable, and he published widely throughout the course of his life. He was born to a wealthy family in Leamington Spa, but Crowley later, as a teenager, rejected his parents' fundamentalist Christian Plymouth Brethren faith to pursue an interest in Western esotericism. Paradoxically, the money the family had came from the brewing industry, Crowley's Alton ales. His father died when he was 11, whom he was very close to, and this was a major turning point for him. He was educated at Trinity College, Cambridge, where he focused his attention on mountaineering and poetry, and that resulted in several publications. In 1898, he joined the esoteric Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, where he trained in ceremonial magic by the likes of Samuel Liddell, MacGregor Mathers and Alan Bennett. He went mountaineering in Mexico with Oscar Eckenstein before studying Hindu and Buddhist practices in India. In November 1899, Crowley purchased Boleskine House in Foyers on the shore of Loch Ness in Scotland. He developed a love for Scottish culture, describing himself as the Laird of Boleskine, and took to wearing traditional Highland dress, even during his visits to London. Indeed, Mathers himself had passed himself off as Scottish. In 1904 he married Rose Edith Kelly and they honeymooned in Cairo, Egypt. On the 28th of July 1905, Rose gave birth to Crowley's first child, a daughter named Lilith, with Crowley writing the pornographic snowdrops from the curate's garden to entertain his recuperating wife. After the unsuccessful 1905 Kanchenjunga expedition and a visit to India and China, Crowley returned to Britain, where he attracted attention as a prolific author of poetry, novels and occult literature. After spending time in Algeria in 1912, he was initiated into another esoteric order, the German-based Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO, rising to become the leader of its British branch, which he reformulated in accordance with his Thelemite beliefs. Although the OTO Thelemite groups were established in Britain, Australia and North America, Crowley gained widespread notoriety during his lifetime, being a recreational drug user and bisexual. Crowley remained a highly influential figure over Western esotericism and the counterculture of the 1960s, and considers to be considered a prophet in Thelema. A few people, even one of his biographers and fans, Dr. Stephen Skinner, would argue that Aleister Crowley was a nice person. Richard T. Cole suggests that Crowley became a psychopath after damaging his frontal lobe as a child experimenting with gunpowder. Whilst widely admired within the Western tradition, it's generally accepted that he was a thoroughly unpleasant person to know, although some do disagree with that. Most people would argue that he was a narcissist or maybe even a sociopath. But I would argue that much of what we really know about his life, and indeed his practice, can be attributed to narcissism. Only once is there any example of him apologising, and even then it was somewhat half-hearted. Nevertheless, during his lifetime, he was examined by a psychiatrist, and it was concluded that he was mentally sound, if addicted to drugs. Crowley decided to climb Kanchenjunga in the Himalayas of Nepal, widely recognised as the world's most treacherous mountain. The expedition was marred by general argument between Crowley and the others, who thought that he was reckless. They eventually mutinied against Crowley's control, while with the other climbers heading back down the mountain as nightfall approached, despite Crowley warning that it was too dangerous. Subsequently, several porters and a climber were killed in the accident, something for which Crowley was widely blamed by the mountaineering community. Rose and Lilith returned to Europe, whilst Crowley headed to Shanghai to meet an old friend, Elaine Simpson. Crowley then sailed to Japan and Canada, before continuing to New York City. Upon arrival in Britain, Crowley learned that his daughter, Lilith, had died of typhoid in Rangoon, something he later blamed on Rose's increasing alcoholism. He began a short-lived romances with actress Vera Lola Neville, named Snep, and author Ada Levinson, whilst Rose gave birth to Crowley's second daughter, Lola Zala, in February 1907. He published much of the works of MacGregor Mathers, who was one of the founders of the Golden Dawn, under his own name, including curses to Mathers, and travelled to Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it was known then, to gather dirt on Mathers. This was after Mathers had shunned him, and such acts of retribution are typical of narcissists. It's reported that Mathers had become a substitute father for him. Indeed, I'm a victim of psychopathic narcissist abuse when I broke off contact with my partner of 20 years. And she poisoned my relationship with the person who she claimed was my son. I have no evidence to believe he isn't. And lost me what had been a wonderful credit rating in the UK. Secret Agent. In his 1929 book, Confessions and Elsewhere, Crowley made some vague references to his intelligence work, notably his 1914 to 1919 mission to the United States. He claimed that his public role as an anti-British propagandist masked his counterintelligence on behalf of His Majesty. Biographers Richard B. Spence and Tobias Churton have suggested that Crowley was a spy for British services, and that amongst other things he joined the Golden Dawn under the command of them to monitor the activities of Mathers. At Cambridge, Crowley maintained a vigorous sex life with women, largely female prostitutes, from one of whom he caught syphilis, but eventually he took part in same-sex activities, despite their illegality at the time. It was well known that many secret services ran brothels in Cambridge to blackmail undergraduates to working for them. Could this be when Crowley was recruited? Spence has suggested that the purpose of Crowley's trip to Mexico might have been to explore Mexican oil prospects for British intelligence. Spence has also suggested that the trip to China was orchestrated as a part of a British intelligence scheme to monitor the region's opium trade. In 1897, Crowley travelled to St. Petersburg, later saying that he was trying to learn Russian as he was considering a future diplomatic career there. But was this an espionage exercise, as Churton argues? Although he does only see him as an asset rather than an actual spy. In Paris, it's claimed that he had a relationship with Barbara Bush's mother, Pauline Pierce, and some claim that he is Barbara Bush's father. Crowley spent the First World War in the United States, where he took up painting and campaigned for the German war effort against Britain, later revealing that he'd infiltrated the pro-German movement to assist British intelligence. Professing to be of Irish ancestry and a supporter of Irish independence from Great Britain, Crowley began to espouse support for Germany in their war against Britain. He became involved in New York's pro-German movement, and in January 1915, German spy George Sylvester Viereck employed him as a writer for his propagandist paper, The Fatherland, which was dedicated to keeping the US neutral in the conflict. In later years, Crowley was denounced as a traitor to Britain for this action. Richard B. Spence argues that Crowley played a major role in the sinking of the Lusitania, a plot to overthrow the government of Spain, the thwarting of Irish and Indian nationalist conspiracies, and in the 1941 flight of Rudolf Hess to Scotland. In 1920, he established the Abbey of Thelema, a religious commune in Cefalù, Sicily, where he lived with various followers. His libertine lifestyle led to denunciations in the British press, and the Italian government evicted him in 1923. Or could it be that Mussolini knew him to be an agent spying on the fascist movement? When the Second World War broke out, Crowley wrote to the Naval Intelligence Division offering his services to him, but they declined. Indeed, he wasn't allowed a passport to leave the UK. However, he's associated with a variety of figures in the British intelligence community at the time, including Dennis Wheatley, Roald Dahl, Ian Fleming and Maxwell Knight, and claimed to have been behind the V for Victory sign, first used by the BBC, but that's never been proven. Churchill is known to have burnt many documents related to British intelligence after the war, maybe including his links to Crowley. Certainly in later life, having spent his family's fortunes, he was being supported by an organisation and/or individuals, and it's something of a myth that he died in abject poverty. Could it be that his magic was simply a foil for his work as a spy? Definitely the Secret Services purposely recruit narcissists, and a good many in British intelligence have had connections with magic. Crowley's magic. Thelema is a mashup of the Jewish Kabbalah and the Greco-Egyptian Hematic tradition. So much, however, is a fabrication and inaccurate. Indeed, most is really a framework, but doesn't really explain how to do magic. Indeed, a good many magicians have followed the myth and eventually decided that it doesn't work. Although I need to add that some important magicians have used it as the basis for their seemingly powerful spells. Of those who still practice Thelema, many would now see themselves as mystics rather than magicians. They're more interested in the philosophy of occult than actually practicing magic, so a little like myself. So yeah, it's very close to my own perspective, albeit that Aleister Crowley is the last person who I would follow or venerate. Victor Newberg met Crowley in February 1907 and became his sexual partner and closest disciple. In 1908, the pair toured northern Spain before heading to Tangiers in Morocco. The following year, Neuburg stayed at Boleskine, where he and Crowley engaged in sadomasochism. At Boleskine House, he's claimed to have begun the Abermelin ritual, but never completed them. Something I find incongruous with a practicing magician. Richard T. Cole argues that the museum in Egypt, where Rose is said to have had an encounter with Horus, but Richard T. Cole argues that this museum didn't exist when Crowley claimed it to. Indeed, Cole demolishes so much of that Crowley writes autobiographically. He even referred to his autobiography as the autobiography of a saint. Crowley claimed to have been contacted by the supernatural entity named Iwas in Egypt, who provided him with the Book of the Law, a sacred text that served as the basis for Thelema, announcing the start of the Æon of Horus. The book declared that its followers should do what thou wilt and should align themselves with their true will through the practice of magic. Although almost certainly this book is a fabrication. Crowley advocated complete sexual freedom for both men and women. He argued that heterosexual and bisexual people should not suppress their sexual orientation, commenting that a person must not be ashamed or afraid of being homosexual. If that happens to be, so at heart. He must not attempt to violate his own rules of nature because of public opinion or medieval morality or religious prejudice, which would wish he were otherwise. On other issues, he adopted a more conservative attitude. He opposed abortion on moral grounds, believing that no woman following her true will would ever desire one. Sexuality played an important, a major role in Crowley's ideas about magic and his practice of it, and it's been described as being central to Thelema. He outlines 3 forms of sexual magic: the autoerotic, homosexual and heterosexual, and argues that such acts could be used to focus the magician's will onto a specific goal, such as in financial gain or personal creative success. For Crowley, sex was treated as a sacrament, with the consumption of sexual fluids interpreted as the Eucharist. Indeed, this was manifested as the cakes of light, a biscuit containing either menstrual blood or a mixture of semen and vaginal fluids. There are a few examples, however, of when Crowley is believed to have raped people, and certainly once at knife point. Both during his life and after it, Crowley had been widely described as a Satanist, although that is by his detractors. Crowley himself did not consider himself a Satanist, nor did he worship Satanist, as he did not accept the Christian worldview in which Satan was believed to exist. But his critique was of the oppression of the soul by Protestant religions. He never used satanic imagery. For instance, he nevertheless used satanic imagery. For instance, describing himself as the Beast 666 and referring to the whore of Babylon in his work, while in later life he sent anti-Christmas cards to his friends. In fact, many see Crowley's main contribution as his spiritual contribution, often claim that he was much misunderstood, and I'd be the first to take on board that criticism of myself. Of course, he was picked up in the 60s, as much he talked about seemed to have great resonance with the modern age. His life played a role in the work of William S. Burroughs, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, David Bowie, Ozzy Osbourne, Robert Anton Wilson, Timothy Leary, Genesis P-Orridge, and many, many others. Given that he also looked at Eastern philosophy, I have to admit there are many points where there is some resonance regarding with my own thoughts, especially regarding the ego. But ultimately I see him as being a little like Anton LaVey, someone led by his own narcissism, despite seeking to suppress the ego, although maybe with a little more to offer than LaVey. However, could so much of what I've talked about be explained by his reaction to his strict religious upbringing? Well, I really hope you've enjoyed this vlog, and if you have, can you help me out a little? Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and then you'll be notified of future vlogs. But also hit the like button and make a comment, because these seem to be what determine the YouTube algorithm, and I'm being really punished by it. So whatever help I can get from you is so appreciated. It really is. When I started this, I was going to do it this section, the real magic of Java. I was going to issue maybe every 2-3 months. Now it's happening maybe every 2 or 3 days. So yeah, if you hit the bell, you'll hear about it. And thank you so much. Thank you for listening. Really heartfelt thanks.